Imagine believing you're addicted to someone, that you can't breathe without their text, can't function without their presence, can't exist without their validation. You tell yourself it's love, you tell yourself it's passion, you tell yourself you found your person. But what if I told you that what you call addiction is actually starvation, that what you mistake for deep connection is actually deep deprivation, that the person you think you can't live without is simply the first person who offered crumbs to your emotionally starved soul? In my years of studying the human psyche, I have discovered one of the most profound insights about human attachment and why so many of us confuse emotional hunger with love, desperation with devotion, and starvation with satisfaction. The revelation I'm about to share may not only change how you see your relationships, but how you see the very foundation of your emotional life. This isn't just about psychology, this is about liberation from the prison of emotional poverty. I have come to understand that we live in a world where most people are walking around emotionally malnourished, mistaking the first taste of attention for a feast, the first glimpse of affection for abundance. I know that what we often call love addiction is actually the desperate clinging of someone who has been emotionally starved their entire life, finally finding someone willing to throw them scraps. Think about it. How many times have you found yourself obsessing over someone who gave you just enough attention to keep you hooked, but never enough to truly nourish you? How many times have you mistaken breadcrumbs for banquets? How many times have you called it love when it was really just the relief of someone finally noticing your emotional starvation? I have written extensively about what I call the personal unconscious, the repository of all our forgotten experiences, repressed emotions, and unmet needs. I believe that most of our adult relationships are unconscious attempts to heal childhood wounds, to finally receive what we never got when we needed it most. But here's the tragedy I've observed: when you're emotionally starved, you can't tell the difference between someone who truly loves you and someone who simply isn't completely ignoring you. This is the great deception of our time. We live in an age where emotional neglect is normalized, where surface-level interactions are mistaken for intimacy, where being seen by someone, anyone, feels like a miracle. We are so hungry for genuine connection that we mistake attention for affection, possession for love, and obsession for devotion. So I ask you this: what are you really craving? Is it them, or is it the feeling of being seen? Is it their love, or is it the experience of mattering to someone? Is it their presence, or is it the temporary relief from the ache of being emotionally invisible your entire life? I have come to understand that emotional starvation begins in childhood. Perhaps you grew up in a home where love was conditional, where attention was scarce, where your emotional needs were treated as inconveniences. Perhaps you learned early that to survive, you had to minimize your needs, to be grateful for whatever scraps of affection came your way, to never ask for too much because too much was always too much. If that was your reality, then your nervous system learned to survive on emotional poverty. Your psyche adapted to scarcity. Your heart learned to be grateful for crumbs because crumbs were better than nothing. And now, as an adult, when someone offers you even the smallest portion of genuine attention, it feels like abundance. It feels like everything you've ever wanted. It feels like addiction, but it's not addiction. It's starvation, finally finding food. The problem I've observed is that when you're emotionally starved, you can't discern between healthy nourishment and junk food. You can't tell the difference between someone who wants to feed your soul and someone who just enjoys watching you beg. You can't distinguish between love and the temporary relief from loneliness. This is why so many people find themselves in relationships with emotionally unavailable people. It's not because they're attracted to unavailability. It's because unavailability feels familiar. It mirrors the emotional environment they grew up in. The hot and cold dynamic, the uncertainty, the desperate hope that if they just try hard enough, love hard enough, give enough, they'll finally receive the consistent love they've always craved. I call this projection. We project onto others our unconscious needs, our unresolved wounds, our deepest longings. The person you think you're addicted to isn't necessarily special. They're simply the screen onto which you're projecting your lifelong hunger for emotional nourishment. Think about it. Have you ever noticed that the people you feel most addicted to are often the ones who give you just enough to keep you hoping, but never enough to feel truly satisfied? That's not coincidence. That's your wounded psyche choosing familiar territory. That's your emotionally starved self gravitating toward the same scarcity it learned to survive on. But here's where my understanding becomes transformative. I believe that awareness changes everything. The moment you recognize that what you call love addiction is actually emotional starvation, you can begin to heal the real wound. You can stop trying to get emotionally unavailable people to feed you and start learning to nourish yourself. This doesn't mean you don't need others. It means you stop expecting others to heal wounds they didn't create. It means you stop making your emotional well-being dependent on people who may not have the capacity or willingness to truly see you. It means you begin the sacred work of becoming your own source of emotional nourishment. The truth is, most people who struggle with what they call love addiction are actually dealing with unresolved attachment trauma. They learned early that love is scarce, that attention must be earned, that their emotional needs are burdens. So when someone shows them even basic human kindness, it feels like the answer to all their prayers. But I know that real healing doesn't come from finally finding someone who feeds your starvation. It comes from healing the wound that created the starvation in the first place. It comes from learning to give yourself the emotional nourishment you've been desperately seeking from others. I ask you now, when was the last time you felt truly seen, not by someone else, but by yourself? When was the last time you offered yourself the same compassion you desperately seek from others? When was the last time you spoke to yourself the way you long for others to speak to you? If that feels foreign, you're not alone. Most emotionally starved people have never learned to be emotionally present for themselves. They've spent their entire lives looking outward for nourishment, never realizing that the capacity for self-love, self-compassion, and self-acceptance has been within them all along. This is the beginning of true healing. Not finding someone who will finally love you the way you want to be loved, but learning to love yourself so deeply that you can discern between genuine love and mere attention, between real nourishment and emotional junk food, between healthy attachment and trauma bonding. I often speak of individuation, the process of becoming whole, of integrating all aspects of the self. For those who struggle with emotional starvation, individuation means learning to meet your own emotional needs, to validate your own experiences, to be present for your own pain without needing someone else to witness it for it to matter. This is not about becoming isolated or independent to the point of disconnection. This is about becoming so emotionally nourished from within that you can engage in relationships from a place of abundance rather than scarcity, choice rather than desperation, love rather than need. The person you think you're addicted to may not be your soulmate. They may simply be the first person who offered water to someone dying of thirst. And while you should be grateful for that water, you shouldn't mistake it for an ocean. You shouldn't build your entire emotional life around someone who happened to notice your drought. Because when you heal your emotional starvation, when you learn to truly nourish yourself, something miraculous happens. You stop being addicted to people and start being attracted to them. You stop needing their validation and start appreciating their presence. You stop trying to get them to fill your void and start sharing your fullness with them. This is where the healing deepens, because underneath every addiction is a wound, and underneath every wound is a story. The story of a child who needed to be seen, heard, valued, and cherished. The story of someone whose emotional needs were minimized, dismissed, or used against them. The story of a heart that learned to survive on scraps because scraps were all that was available. But you're not that child anymore. You have the power now to give yourself what you never received. You have the capacity to heal what was broken, to nourish what was starved, to love what was rejected. And when you do that work, when you become your own source of emotional abundance, you'll no longer confuse starvation with love. I am not asking you to become emotionally self-sufficient islands. I am inviting you to become emotionally mature adults who can distinguish between genuine connection and trauma bonding, between healthy attachment and addictive clinging, between love and the desperate relief from loneliness. So the question I pose to you is this: are you ready to stop being addicted to people and start loving them? Are you ready to stop seeking emotional salvation from others and start providing it for yourself? Are you ready to heal the starvation that has been driving your choices, your relationships, your entire emotional life? Because the truth is, you were never addicted to them. You were just hungry for the love you never learned to give yourself. And once you learn to feed your own soul, you'll never again mistake starvation for satisfaction, desperation for devotion, or emotional poverty for love. The deeper you go into this understanding, the more you'll see that what you thought was about them was always about you, about your unmet needs, your unhealed wounds, your unspoken longings. And there's something beautiful about that realization, because it means the power to heal has always been in your hands. I believe that our greatest suffering often comes from misunderstanding our own experiences. We think we're broken because we crave connection. We think we're weak because we need love. We think we're addicted because we can't stop thinking about someone who showed us even a glimpse of what emotional nourishment feels like. But what if none of that is true? What if your craving for connection is actually proof of your humanity? What if your need for love is evidence of your capacity to give it? What if your so-called addiction is actually your psyche's intelligent response to finally finding something that resembles the nourishment it's always needed? The problem isn't that you have needs. The problem is that you've been taught to be ashamed of them, to minimize them, to seek their fulfillment in ways that ultimately leave you more starved than when you started. Think about this. How many times have you been told you're too much for needing reassurance? How many times have you been made to feel guilty for wanting consistency in love? How many times have you been shamed for having the audacity to want to feel emotionally safe with another human being? That shame didn't come from nowhere. It came from a world that has forgotten how to truly nourish the human heart, a world that mistakes emotional needs for weaknesses, vulnerability for pathology, and the desire for deep connection for clinginess. But I know better. I understand that our emotional needs are not character flaws to be overcome, but essential aspects of our humanity to be honored. The problem arises when we try to meet those needs through people who cannot or will not meet them, when we mistake the relief of attention for the satisfaction of love. This is where the work begins, not in finding someone who will finally feed your starvation, but in learning to recognize emotional starvation for what it is. Not in changing your needs, but in learning to meet them in healthy, sustainable ways. Not in becoming less human, but in becoming more whole. When you begin to heal your emotional starvation, you'll notice something profound. The people you once felt addicted to will lose their power over you, not because you no longer care about them, but because you no longer need them to feel whole. You'll be able to love them without losing yourself, to appreciate them without idealizing them, to connect with them without becoming dependent on them. This is the freedom I promise. Not freedom from love, but freedom to love. Not independence from others, but interdependence with them. Not the absence of need, but the ability to meet your needs in ways that enhance rather than diminish your dignity. And as you heal, as you learn to distinguish between emotional starvation and healthy hunger, between addiction and attraction, between desperation and devotion, you'll begin to see your past relationships differently. You'll understand why you stayed too long in situations that hurt you, why you accepted love that felt more like crumbs than sustenance, why you called it addiction when it was really just the cry of a starved heart finally finding food. There's no shame in any of it. There's only understanding, compassion, and the opportunity to choose differently moving forward. Because now you know the difference between someone who loves you and someone who simply isn't completely ignoring you. Now you can tell the difference between healthy attachment and trauma bonding. Now you understand that real love doesn't feel like addiction, because real love doesn't leave you starving. I have taught that the goal isn't to eliminate our capacity for deep connection, but to heal the wounds that cause us to mistake intensity for intimacy, possession for love, and starvation for satisfaction. When those wounds heal, when that starvation is addressed, your entire relationship with love transforms. You stop attracting people who can only offer you breadcrumbs because you're no longer willing to call breadcrumbs a meal. You stop settling for inconsistent affection because you've learned what consistent love feels like when it comes from within. You stop confusing emotional unavailability with mystery and start recognizing it as exactly what it is, someone who cannot or will not meet you in the depths of authentic connection. The most powerful realization of all is this: you were never too much for the right person. You were just asking the wrong people to feed a hunger they were never equipped equipped to satisfy. Your emotional needs aren't excessive. Your desire for consistent love isn't unrealistic. Your longing to be truly seen and cherished isn't asking too much. You were just emotionally starved and you mistook the first person who threw you crumbs for your savior. But now you know better. Now you understand that real love doesn't feel like addiction, because real love actually feeds you. Real love doesn't leave you constantly hungry, because real love is a sustainable source of nourishment. And when you find that kind of love, whether with another person or first and most importantly with yourself, you'll wonder how you ever mistook starvation for satisfaction, how you ever confused emotional poverty with passion, how you ever thought that the ache of unmet needs was the same thing as the fullness of genuine connection. This is my invitation to you, not to stop loving, not to stop connecting, not to stop opening your heart to others, but to heal the starvation that has been driving your choices, to learn the difference between emotional nourishment and emotional junk food, to discover what it feels like to love from fullness rather than emptiness, to choose from abundance rather than scarcity. Because when you heal your emotional starvation, you don't lose your capacity for deep love. You gain the ability to recognize it, to receive it, and to give it in ways that honor both your humanity and your dignity. You learn that addiction was never love, and love was never meant to feel like addiction. Welcome to emotional abundance. Welcome to the end of starvation. Welcome to love as it was always meant to be, nourishing, sustainable, and real.